Hello, in this video we are going to learn how to solve square root equations. I want you to go ahead and take a look at these 4 examples. Hopefully you notice that all of them are very similar to one another. They all have 4, they all have k, they all have minus 13, they all have equals 5, and they all also have square roots. However, when you look closely at these different problems, you'll notice that they're slightly different. Specifically, if you look at the square root, sometimes the square root's really short, like in number 1, and sometimes the square root is really long, like in number 4. So even though all of these problems have the same numbers and symbols, all 4 of them will actually have different answers. And here's what we need to remember. What is outside of the square root must come first. So let's just look at these examples and see how they all are different. So in the first problem, I have to look at what is on the outside of the square root first. And those numbers need to be canceled before I cancel my square root. So as always, I start furthest away from my variable. So I will start by adding 13 to each side of this equation. The 13s will cancel. 4 square root k will equal 18. Next, because a 4 and a square root next to each other mean multiply, I will divide by 4. The 4's cancel. Square root of k comes down, and 18 divided by 4 makes 4.5. And now that everything outside of the square root has been canceled, now I can cancel the square root by using squared. A square root and a square cancel. K comes down, and 4.5 squared makes 20.25. So in this first example, k equals 20.25. But now let's look at example number 2. So when I look at example number 2, and I look at my square root, I notice that the only thing outside of the square root is the 4. So that must come first because it is outside of the square root. So when a 4 and a square root are touching, that means multiply. So I will divide both sides by 4. The 4's will cancel. Square root of k minus 13 comes down. And 5 divided by 4 makes 1.25. And now when I look at my square root, there is nothing left on the outside of that square root. There's nothing behind it, nor nothing in front of it. So now I can cancel out my square root by using squared. So I will draw my parentheses, and I will square both sides of the equation. A square root and a square will cancel. K minus 13 comes down. And 1.5 squared makes 1.565. And lastly, to get k by itself, I will add 13 to both sides. So in this problem, k will equal 14.5625, which is a very different answer than what we got in question number 1. Now let's look at question number 3, which again will be different. In question number 3, when I look at the square root, I notice that the only thing outside of the square root is the minus 13. So that must come first. So the opposite of minus 13 is plus 13. The 13s will cancel. The square root of 4k comes down, and 5 plus 13 is 18. And now when I look at the square root, I notice that there's nothing outside of the square root. There's nothing behind it, nor nothing in front of it. So I will need to cancel the square root next. And I cancel the square root by using squared. So I will draw parentheses and square both sides. The square root and the square cancel. 4k comes down. And 18 squared makes 324. And now, to get rid of the 4, I will divide both sides by 4. So for problem number 3, k is equal to 81. We have one example left, and you guessed it, it will have yet a different answer. In example number 4, when I look at the square root, there's nothing outside of the square root. So the very first thing I need to do for this problem is to cancel the square root. So I will draw my parentheses and square both sides. A square root and a square cancel. 4k minus 13 comes down. And 5 squared is 25. And now I can solve this problem like a normal two-step equation. I will add 13 to both sides. 25 plus 13 makes 38. And then I will divide by 4. And for this problem, k will be equal to 9.5. So again, I want you to notice that all 4 of these problems, even though they started with the same numbers and symbols, had 4 different answers. What you need to think about is always cancel what is outside of the square root first.